Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Frequency. So in this episode, we finally get that big reveal at the end of the episode that ends up revealing that, hey, the one behind all of this all is in fact Robbie, that he is the Nightingale, that this whole situation, it was Joe covering. Not too surprised. I kept saying, I just kept feeling like Joe wasn't, obviously he fit the criteria he fit the criteria, and it just, all the evidence was pointing to him, but it's just I just couldn't quite nail it as to why. It just, I kept throwing out Robbie, but obviously I didn't have any concrete proof that it was him, but it's just certain things kind of made sense. It's okay, Megan kept saying Robbie was dead, but I was like, nah, maybe Robbie's actually off somewhere, and he that Joe's been covering for him this entire time, and it seems like that is the case. We can't because I brought it up a long time ago, at the beginning of the season, and being okay, obviously there's an obvious psychological reason why the Nightingale does what they do. Obviously, you would think because Joe's such a religious person that it actually makes sense that he's doing what he's doing. But now that you've seen how things played out with his mom's death, that actually Robbie was there, he saw when his mom he kind of saw the aftermath of when his mom died, and then Joe did the messed up thing of after it happened, he's and Robbie ended up walking in, he's don't worry, son. This is a good thing. We're going to give her a good death. And the fact is that he made Robbie participate in it too. So basically, anytime Robbie's been killing these women, he's been kind of trying to give them a good death, because I guess he feels like these nurses, maybe he does extensive research into them and finds out that they don't actually have the perfect lives. That maybe in his mind, he's saving these women from themselves. I think I even threw that out there as a weird thing, maybe this has something to do with his mom, and it turns out to be the case. I guess I'll watch enough police stuff, some of it kind of seeps in. But nevertheless, it seems that's what it is. Maybe that's the case. He feels some of these women don't have good lives, and he's trying to save them from the lives that they're living, or something like that, or, because it seems like he does extensive research. Even when we saw at the end, when we're looking at the wall he has of even Julie, he did a lot of extensive research. Could you even have Robbie admitting at the beginning of the episode, when they meet him at the beginning of the episode, because he's basically been under an alias this entire time. That's why Megan thought he was dead, just because she assumed he was dead because she could never find him, but it's because he left, but it's because of that. The question is, how would a 16-year-old really do all that on his own anyway? I guess arguably a 16-year-old could do it, but it's it wouldn't make sense that Joe would actually do it for him, probably because Joe found out what he was doing. Because you also have to think about the camp situation too. Megan cut herself because she was okay, he's the one. She did that because Robbie was at the camp and was trying to protect him back then. But it makes you wonder, it seems like when his mom died, that's when he had the breaking point, but maybe there was something else too. Because at the time his mom was killed, it was because Megan had already been locked up in some mental institute. It makes you wonder, I guess, in some twisted way, I guess you could argue Joe was trying to protect Megan from all of this, because he made the promise to her that he would never hurt Rob. No, he made a promise, was it to Robbie? He made a promise to Robbie that he'd never hurt Megan. So maybe that's why he put her in a mental institute, so she'd be kind of away from her. I don't know. Because he's gotten to the point later on when he's in the bathroom in the present day, he's praying and stuff like that. And it's okay, it seems like he recognizes that this is all his fault. All of it's kind of starting to sink in. He's having to confront it after all this time. He's been living with this guilt for such a long time. With these past, 20 plus years of, all these different murders and stuff like that. So he has to live with the guilt of what happened. Because, I was wondering, why was it in this particular timeline Robbie was there? I guess certain events happened to play out so that Robbie ended up being there at that moment. It's what he said, he came there to make sure that Megan didn't die. Because the question is, he even said himself, why did he kill her in the other timeline when, the timeline where Raimi shot him. It's like, why did he do that? Not unless it wasn't actually him. Maybe he went on a run. Maybe it was actually Robbie who came there. Like the whole thing got revealed. And then, because Megan didn't know he was still alive, so maybe she actually shocked. And he's like, I guess we have to cover our tracks. And Robbie kills her himself. I don't know. We don't know. Or maybe Joe did it because he felt like it was the only way he could protect Robbie. Couldn't have any loose ends or something like that. He broke the promise he had then. I don't know. Because something interesting too, I want to point out, I don't know if this is the case. Do let me know if I'm wrong. But is it the same cop that figured out it was Joe? Isn't that the same cop that didn't notice it in the other timeline when he was on the run the first time? Like, wasn't that... Because the cop didn't recognize him because he had glasses and he had dyed his hair. But at this point in time, he didn't have the chance to because he kind of had, like, all that stuff with Megan at the cabin and stuff like that happened after, like, all the evidence was kind of found that it was plastered all over the place. So he didn't have a chance to really disguise himself. So it looks like to me like that was the same cop, but maybe it wasn't. But then there's even a situation where Raimi ends up, like, obviously beating the crap out of him. Which I was actually shocked she did because her and Frank had a conversation earlier. She's like, okay, you got to go back to the precinct and beat the crap out of him. And Frank's like, no, I don't, unlike you, I don't get a do-over, which is true. Like, yeah, you can help him figure stuff out in the past, sure, but it's like, he only gets one chance at this. Let's not forget, he helped you erase the whole you murdering Joe, so like, he can help you fix your own problem. But even then, he's like, hey, you still got to be careful because, we don't really, even talking later on, it's like, we don't know how this whole thing works. It might take a little while for time to kind of stop moving and finally, like, settle down. But it's just like certain things, I'm like all over the place, I do apologize, but it's just like certain things just kept not fitting. Like the whole, like to me, I thought it was a little suspicious that Megan just all of a sudden brought up like, oh yeah, we could, the shed at, at the cabin where he'd take them and beat them to kind of sink it into their heads. Like, obviously I started thinking like, okay, that's a little suspicious that you just come up with that. Now I start thinking like, I didn't start running through my mind. I was like, what if it's actually Megan who's actually the Nightingale? But then it started crossing my mind, what if they're actually both behind this? Because it made me wonder like, why did Robbie run the moment he saw Frank? That was really suspicious. Like, it really started setting in my mind like, why would you run? Like, why would you run from a cop? It's like, I guess I could argue it's like, well, Joe's always had cop friends, so it's kind of like, oh yeah, Joe's trying to bring him home or something like that. But it's just like, I don't know. But it was just like, that was kind of suspicious. Like, why would you run when you saw Frank? But I guess it's like, you could argue he was just concerned. He was worried. Especially when Frank actually told him, like, no, I know what Joe did to your mom. And that still made him run. Like, I guess argue because you could be like, okay, that means he'd have to confront Joe about the fact that they killed his mom. But it just didn't fit right. But what exactly is the reason why Joe would protect him all this time? Like I said, I do feel like more so than anything, it's gotta be guilt. Because he feels so guilty. Like, because the thing is, Raimi, like, even Raimi's like, not gonna be able to figure that out. Because, I mean, obviously, he ended up killing himself in the present. She kind of helped him do it, too. So, she ended up giving him her shoestrings, and, obviously, he helped kind of figure stuff out. And I love the fact is that Stan is like, just no matter what timeline it is, because like at first Frank is like, because in the past, he beat himself on the table, like he smashed his head against the table till he started bleeding and got himself released. And Stan was like, yo, I'm sorry, Frank. The fact of the matter is, it's like, yo, something suspicious. You went in there with a suspect about just some like stealing some money and stuff like that, and then he comes out beaten up. You cut off the mic so no one can hear. Don't you think it's suspicious? And Frank's like, are you stupid, Stan? It's like, dude, this is bigger than us. They're literally, you're so focused on this, you don't even realize we got a wolf at our doorsteps while you're up here nibbling at fleas. And it's just like, it makes sense because it's like Stan was probably the first one to be like, okay, let him go. I mean, even that other cop, like Frank is like, why'd you let him go? It's like, yo, you beat the crap out of the dude. You're making all of us look bad. It's like, shut up. It's always because it's weird too, because you had that situation and then you had the other. It's because the guy wasn't known as, Frank didn't reveal him to be the Nightingale at the time. But then you look at Raimi's situation when it's all found out that he's a Nightingale. Like that cop was like, "Yo, so you got everything you need?" And she's like, "Yeah." So and then they focused on her shoes, and I was like, "Okay, I don't see what the big deal about her shoes. Oh, did they switch shoes or something?" And then he pulls her shoestrings out of his shoes. I'm like, right, okay, because they take that away from you just in case you get all suicidal, like, that they make sure that you don't kill yourself. I was like, all right. So Raimi gave him her shoestrings. But because the obvious suspicious thing was the fact is because at first when he got the box, I was like, oh man, things are messed up now. Satch didn't get to the box in time, which I did appreciate the fact is Frank went to Satch because that's one of the few people he can rely on. He's like, hey, Satch, I need your back on this, man. He's like, told him the truth. The person the situation that went down that you told me to kind of back down from, I kidnapped the dude. It's like, oh, why would you kidnap him? Because home dude is the Nightingale. And Satch is like, all right, man. Oh, what you need me to do? And like the box was going, I was like, oh man, everything's going to change. Raimi's going to get screwed over because now he's going to get released and everything. Which granted, it was like, I guess he is a Nightingale. I was like, I'm still like rambling through it. It's like things just kept changing in my mind. I'm like, I wasn't for sure. The thing is, I should have stuck with my guns. I had the thought that was Robbie. I should have stuck with it. I just didn't know how it was going to piece together to be Robbie, especially because I guess that's kind of the point, because Robbie has his own family, at least he claims. He says, like, oh, he's got, like, a wife and child, and maybe he does have a normal life, I mean, maybe he's just, or maybe he's turned into Joe. That's the question. I hope Raimi ends up looking into Robbie, that might be what kind of trips her up. Like, maybe she still feels like things are a little off. At least from the previews, from the little bit of the previews I've seen, it seems like that might be the case. Like Raimi's the one, because it seems like Frank is telling her, like, "Oh, calm down, everything's gone. We got it. We got him. It's done. We saved the day. We saved everything. We saved your mom. We saved all the future victims. Even Amanda, like, who would be a repeat victim." So, but I'm guessing, like, if Raimi looks into his life, she might end up finding out that there's kind of an abuse situation, like a repeat of what happened with Joe and Robbie and Megan. So. But the question is, like, when it's all said and done, like, Jules is back. It took a while, like, which is strange, because usually the timeline shifting happens immediately. But this time it took a little while to kind of settle in. So that does, I don't know. Because Raimi does normally notice that. It's like, she's like, because she had concern, because, like, I came back home, mom's not here. He's like, it might take a while. It's like, but normally it doesn't. Usually it's in a flash that everything changes. But I guess it's like, while Raimi's living her life, time is already starting to change, but it does take a while before it fully affects her life. So, but her mom is back. She's like, "Why are you so excited to see me? I literally was here an hour ago." But that's the question. Why did Robbie spare her this time? It can only be because he met her in '96 that he's saving her now. Maybe because he's got to know Frank and everything, and now he knows it's like, okay, she's no longer a viable target because of that. Maybe the fact is we'll end up finding out that there's actually a different victim, or maybe he ended up not killing anyone else after that. Or maybe something happens and he's going to be triggered and he's going like, okay, now that everything's settled, I guess I still got to get it, like, because just of his, like, his need to do this, maybe he's going to come after her present day or something like that. Like I said, I'm surprised that hasn't come up at all. Like the fact that I'm guessing that might be a future season thing. Like the whole Frank situation. I still don't think Frank's car accident is just an accident. I still believe maybe that'll be something she figures out later on, like, the next episode. Because next week's episode is the season finale, and it's just, I'm so interested to see how this all comes out. And like, we as the audience know it's Robbie, but it's like everything is still pointing towards it being Joe. The fact is that, because even like still the whole Stan situation still son, because it's like Satch is like, I guess like Stan just told, like the fact is that Stan was like, all right, I guess you were right, Frank, essentially, and it's like Satch is like, I guess that means he's gonna back off of you, that everything's good. And then Frank is like, nah, that's just him sharpening his blade. And then there's an envelope in his car that has Frank's name on it, and he puts it in his glove compartment. Like, what is that about? Because he first came at Frank with the whole like God, I forgot her name. The lady that he told to kind of run, that he wanted to try and protect from Stan. Because Stan's coming after him harder, because it's like Frank came at him twice. The first time was about her, and the second time was trying to get, tried to bust him, but then Satch kind of warned him. But the fact is, I'm surprised Frank hasn't told Raimi about the whole Satch situation yet. Cause it's like, yo, that might still be going on. So it's like, help bust. I mean, cause I love the way she looks at Stan now. Because like when Stan was talking to her earlier in the episode, she was just looking at him like with disgust when he walked away. It's something you can't help but see every time she walks past Stan. Cause she knows who and what he is. The fact is that he set her dad up and successfully killed him in another timeline, but tried to kill him in this timeline. So it's like, I know who and what you are. That's why she's always had problems with him throughout the season. Try to tell Satch, like, yo, he's a bad guy, but Satch wouldn't listen. But obviously we know the reasons why behind that. But it makes you wonder how much that has changed now that Frank kind of had that conversation with Satch. Like, I feel like maybe things should have changed because of that. Because Satch has had that conversation with Frank, and it's come out that maybe, Satch isn't in as deep with Stan as he was before, or maybe he still is. Maybe like, I don't know, like, because like I said, it's got to be connected with the whole Frank dying in a present dying in a car accident type of situation. So I don't know. We'll kind of have to see. And something interesting Gordo brought up in this episode is just kind of like, it was kind of really sad. Like, well, first Gordo brings up the fact is that, like, oh, Raimi, you really don't have any friends. It's like, all you've done is dedicated yourself to this case, Nightingale. Like, that's all you do. You come home, you go there. It's like, the fact of the matter is you don't really have a stable life because you don't have really any friends, like, except for me. Your love life's a little kind of hectic. It's like, it's very ambiguous at the moment because it's like, well, there's the dude that you're kind of stalking, Daniel, and then there's the whole situation with Kyle, which that's rectified because it's like, oh, she's engaged in this timeline because she has her engagement ring. So, hey, her and Daniel are together again. I guess I was wrong to be suspicious of them. Maybe. And who knows? Maybe it's actually Kyle this time around, but maybe things have gone back to normal. It does make you wonder what else has changed. Because if things played out the way that she wanted it to, that means her dad is still alive. Her dad lived up to obviously to the car accident, and now her mom is still alive. But also something interesting Gordo pointed out, it was something he actually blamed himself for. It's that basically he got beat up by some kids, they stole his bike. He told his dad was like, instead of being supportive, his dad was like, well, the fact is you should have fought back, you should have tried harder not to get your bike stolen. Kind of douchey, as we kind of learned from Gordo, like his dad wasn't always biggest supporter of what he does, especially, being a stay-at-home dad, especially like, oh, you should have fought, like you went to a law school and you've done nothing with it. So, he would walk home and it'd be pouring down rain, and Jules saw him and was like, I'll offer him a ride to school, and then she dropped him off and she offered to pick him up. The reason why she was out, rather, like he blamed himself because it's like, if she had not been trying to come pick him up, who's to say she wouldn't have been taken? But Raimi's like, no, Nightingale was stalking her for a long time, Gordo. He would have taken her at any point in time, so don't blame yourself. And even Raimi ends up saying something super sad, being the fact is that, like, she said something like, basically her mom packed her a lunch, like she had a PB&J instead of like everyone else had like real food like pizza or something like that. And she had that little stupid thought of being like, little stupid thing you think as a kid, like, oh man, my mom's not cool, she did this instead of doing something cool like every other mom. It's like, oh, I wish I had a different mom. And then later on, she came back home and she didn't have a mom. So it's kind of interesting because the fact is that means Gordo's been sitting on that the entire time, and that's got to be very messed up for Raimi too, because it's like, for her, she never experienced that, but now she had, like, hearing Gordo talk, she has the memory of that, coming home and realizing she no longer had a mom. Like, that's got it, like, it's something I never think about, the fact is of just how, like, such a small detail can mess with you, because it's like you never experienced that personally, but you remember experiencing, you remember that feeling it gave you. It's like, that's like a minute detail that has never come up before, because she's never really brought up like what's happened in her own personal life in this timeline when her mom is no longer around, because the question is, like, at least in the past, Megan doesn't know. But what about the present during that whole situation? Does Megan know now? That is the question. Maybe that was the whole point of giving all that, like pointing Raimi to the evidence. Because maybe Robbie told her exactly where the box was. Maybe Robbie told her exactly where the box was, and then she was kind of like, oh, pointing him in that right direction just to, because maybe they check. I don't know, because the fact is they ran the prints, so you would think Robbie's prints would be on it, but maybe at that point in time he had already wiped them away. Joe had already wiped them away. Because he did so in the past, and like I said, he was just sitting there, and that was even more suspicious. Like, why would you be wiping away your prints? Because I was thinking like he was going to meet up with Robbie because he was asking for a boot. I thought Robbie was going to be there, but it's like, no, he just sat there and wiped off the prints. And it's like, oh, you know who these people are? You might want to call the police. He sits there and eats too. So I guess his conversation with Frank really set in, because I guess like he knew that Frank was closing it and that Frank would figure out the truth. So might as well like escape, get away, so he has enough time to get rid of Robbie's fingerprints and then turn himself in. Like I said, I'm very interested to find out exactly, is it just 100% guilt, or was there something else to the reason why he did what he did, covering for Robbie? So very interested. Like I said, next week is the season finale. I'm just curious to see how this all plays out. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.